So in this video, we're going to look at how can we use Excel to calculate a seasonal factor and then convert it to a seasonal index. So as I showing you on the screen is the lecture video about seasonal factor and the relationship with the seasonal index. So if you don't remember, make sure you watch that video. And here we're going to dive into how can we calculate converting our data set for the private house start to identify their seasonal factor and then also to identify the seasonal index. Okay, so now what we're gonna do is we're gonna look at our data set. Okay, so this is our house. What we learned from the last computer lab exercise. We are able to receive the value for moving average and the center moving average. So as we call out, so the center moving average is what we call it the long-term trend, right? So now let's adding a new tab because we're gonna focusing on here is try to getting our seasonal factor and seasonal index. Okay, so let me just copy my whole data set, and now I'm gonna paste here so I don't want to mess up my last exercise result. Okay, so based on the formula, in order to getting our seasonal factors, what we need to do is to find the ratio between the actual value of the time series and our centered moving average. So our actual time series value is in column B, and our center moving average is in column D. So now we know we just need to find a ratio between these two columns, right? So we in the seasonal factor column, I just need to type equal, and then select my column is here is the my y variable, right? The actual private house starts, and then divided by my the centered moving average. Okay, we're gonna push enter. So this is the first one. So then we can use the same formula for the rest of the time series. So I move my mouse to the right down corner and the right until it turns to the black cross. Left double click it. Okay, so it's just automatically filling all my cells. That's great. So don't forget the last two will be empty because we don't have the value for center moving average. So we can just delete it. Okay. So also I don't want to keep so many decimal places, so I will keep my decimal places to 2. So I select the column E and then go into my number section under the home tab and chose decrease decimals, and then I just, oops. Okay, so I need to select my column with the values and then decrease. Okay. Select my values without including the non-number values. And I will start decreasing to 2. Great. Okay, so this is my seasonal factors. So before we move on to convert the seasonal factor to identify seasonal index, I want to emphasize how we should interpreting the result, right? So as you see that for seasonal factor, it always around 1. It will never smaller than 0 or larger than 2. Okay, so it's like very close to, see, they are going to be centered at 1. Okay, they will be centered at 1. So what does those factor means? Okay, so when the value is larger than 1, that just means the private house starts is larger than average. And then when the value is like the August 1959, so for that quarter, so the private house start is had a larger value than average. So for the November 1959, the value is more than 1. That means the value is smaller than the average. So basically, the 1 is the threshold. If it's exactly to 1, that means that quarter, the private home start is equal to the average private house start. But if the value is larger than 1, that means the value is higher than the average. If the value is smaller than 1, the value is smaller than the average. Okay, great. So now we have our seasonal factor. So next task is how can we identify our seasonal index? So remember for seasonal index is 1 for each season. As you can see for the seasonal factor, we have 1 for each quarter, right? So regardless years. So every year, every quarter, you will have a unique number. So in order to identify the seasonal index, we need to find the average across all across different year, but in the same quarter. So basically, we need to find average of all the, so August is the Q3, right? All the Q3 is a seasonal factor, and we find all of them together and then finding their average. So of course, we have so many data here. It's gonna be a very tedious work. So we don't want to just rely on our manual work. So we actually want to leverage Excel to help us to very quickly identify the seasonal index. So there will take 2 steps. So the first step, you need to mapping your data seasonal factor with the quarters. And then we're gonna leveraging the pivot table. And we're gonna use pivot table to help us to calculate for each quarter, what is the average seasonal factors? Okay, what is the seasonal factor based on quarters? Okay, in order to do that, let's just creating a new column called a quarter. We can just call Q. So the goal here is just try to see Q1, Q2, Q4. So use that way to identify. Okay, so the August 1959, so that's my Q3. So I will type in Q3. And then November, Q4. And then February, Q1, Q2. And then Q3, Q4. And then Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4. So of course, it's gonna take a little bit of time. So I usually do is I can just start copy this to one because it's always 4 quarters, right? So I can just copy and paste. And I copy even longer one because we have more data. And then paste. And I can keep copy even more columns, more cells, because they just keep repeating the same 4 quarters. And I paste it. And I can click, keep copy a little bit longer. Because it just like avoid me to keep typing. Because actually the more I type, the more likely I make error, right? So then I come down here and the paste. You can double check that February corresponding to Q1, May, Q2, okay, everything's right. And then I'm gonna copy one more time, and I'm gonna paste one more time, because so it's very long now. I paste it, and I will paste one more time, so I may over paste it, right? So I'm gonna delete the rest. Okay, so this is the first task you need to do is label your each seasonal factor with the corresponding seasonal number, Q1, Q2, Q3, Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4. So if you're dealing with monthly data, so that will be January, February, March, April, etc. until your December, right? And you're gonna corresponding label it. But here we're dealing with the quarterly data, so we don't need to do that. So after you do that, we will select E and F columns. So E and F column, including the labels S, F, and Q. And I will drag it down. So after I select both column, you see from E3 to F, the last column, F3 to the last row. And I'll click Insert from my Excel. Okay, after I click Insert, I will click Pivot Table. Great. So now after I select Pivot Table, and then I will click OK. Great. So now you are including a new tab. We can just call it seasonal index because you will be able to see the seasonal index here, right? Okay, let me go back. So after you have this new tab developed, so after I add in this new tab for the pivot table, so what we need to do first is we clicked, pay attention on my mouse, click the Q, so that's the 4 quarters. I clicked it, hold it, and drag it down to rows. So now on the left-hand side, as you can see, we are developing Q1, Q2, Q3, and Q4 very quickly, right? So now what we need to do is we're going to select the other variable, SF, seasonal factor, and click and hold it, and drag it down to values. Okay, so now you can see that, where those values coming from. So what they did is actually for the column, the seasonal factor, if they are belonging to Q1, so they were adding all the seasonal factor together. So that's why on here they call it sum of seasonal factor, right? And so the second value here, basically for any seasonal factor is belong to Q2, they will sum all of them together. And based on the lecture, we know that it's not right way to do to getting a seasonal index. So for seasonal index, instead of summing all of them together, we should get an average if they are belong to Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4. So there is an easy way to do is that when you move your mouse to here, there's a little arrow. So if you click it, it will expand. So choose value field setting. So if you do that, you will see that. So by default, they are using sum. So in this exercise, we should choose average because we need to use average of my seasonal factor to get a seasonal index, right? So you choose average and then click OK. Great. So again, let me to reduce the value to 2 decimal place to easy to read, okay? So now what we see the number here, so they are my seasonal index. So the Q1 is 0.81, Q2 is 0.19, Q3 is 1.10, Q4 is 0.89. So what does that mean is for our Q1, so for the private house starts is lower than average. So that is 19% lower than average. For Q2 and Q3, so they're both larger than 1. That means they are larger than average. So for Q2 and Q3, the private house starts is 19%. For the Q2 is 19% higher than average. And Q3 is 10% higher than average. And Q4 is below than 1. So therefore, it's below than average. So by how much? It's by 11%. Okay, so that is how we are able to converting our seasonal factor to seasonal index. Okay, so this is a very easy way to do it versus you just manually identify the value and then calculate average. So that will take you a lot of time, especially when you have large data sets.